former minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, Faith-Driven Leadership in Times of Change, with Payam Zamani.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Wade Franson. It is Created in the Image of God. We have a very special program tonight with a returning guest, Payam Zamani. We had Payam on, 6 weeks ago or so. And at the time, we had a few technical difficulties that made for a suboptimal show. And we definitely wanted to have him back. We talked about, at the time, his history and his upcoming book release. And we're going to get into all those and much, much more this evening. So let's welcome Payam into the studio.
Hi, Wade. It's good to be back with you.
It's wonderful. And we can hear you loud and clear, no echo. You know, we both actually have experience working in technology, and it's somehow funny how it still rolls over us like a steamroller when we try to get it to work. So anyone out there who ever has experienced technical difficulties, don't feel bad. You're in great company. So Payam, you've been busy since we last had you on the show. Not only are you running One Planet Group, doing a number of other things, but you've also had a new book, your book published and released, Crossing the Desert. So how is that going? How is the reception to that book so far?
You know, I had no idea what to expect. It's funny, when I search for my own name on Google, now it says I'm an author. And I know me as an entrepreneur, not as an author. But the reception was, it definitely exceeded my expectations. And the book became a national bestseller. And I think, really the kudos goes to all the friends and friends of friends who promoted the book. I mean, I was just surprised to see how many people out there posted about the book. And it's been really an uplifting experience. You know, every day I receive messages from people who've read the book, they've cried, they've smiled, they've learned something new, or they just have feedback. And it's been really amazing. I've been blown away by the experience.
Wonderful. I see that you've got some luminaries there providing their reviews: Rainn Wilson, Zhang Jin, Stephen Debary, and others. Many reviews already. So congratulations on that. Having some experience in the publishing world, I know it's a little bit, for us men, I guess, if we're authors, maybe one of the closest things we can experience to having a baby, right? All the work that goes into producing that thing. And then there's a moment when it goes live and everything has to work out.
Yes.
So we were chatting a little bit in the studio about tonight's show, having you back in. I mean, we covered your history last time, but let's still spend a couple of minutes on the theme, the story of that book, Crossing the Desert. So to remind our audience and those who were not here for the first time, you were born and raised in Iran, and you were growing up under a government that had come into power through a revolution and was enforcing a kind of religious theocracy based on an interpretation of Islam. What was that like as a child? We talked about that, but refresh our memory what it was like growing up in that. And I think this is in keeping with the theme of the show today, which is around walking this path in times of change.
So, it's interesting. I often tell people that I did not experience human rights until I went to the embassy of the US in Pakistan, in Islamabad. And it's interesting because as someone born in a Baha'i family, I could not really even define what human rights should look like, or what as a human I deserved. And I was born in a country and under a way of thinking that basically normalized the idea of uh, literally beating minorities, preventing minorities from gaining access to all kinds of opportunities. And those issues, those problems got worse after the country turned into an Islamic republic. And to just give an example to your audience, 45 years later, Baha'is in Iran still don't have the right to attend universities. I mean, think about that. Baha'is in Iran, even today, don't have the right to buy or sell property. They don't have the right legally to get a job. I mean, those are Baha'i kids, Baha'i marriages are not considered legal by the system. Baha'i kids are considered illegitimate children in, in that society. So the list goes on and on. So you can just imagine what that environment could have been like. Now, in the 1980s, on top of that, at the violence against Baha'is that continues to today. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, they burned down a Baha'i cemetery. I mean, think about that. This is the mentality that they don't even leave the dead alone. And in the 1980s, they killed hundreds of Baha'is. They expelled many Baha'is from schools, including me as an 11-year-old. I got expelled in the most horrific fashion from a school with the idea of them wanting to kill me, not just get me out of that school. So it's hard to fathom what that environment is like unless you've lived in it.
Well, and for the audience who may not be familiar with it, the Baha'i faith is the largest religious minority in Iran. Is that correct? It's the second largest religious group after Islam. There are more
That's
Baha'is
right.
than Christians in Iran. And for me, I'm always shocked at hypocrisy, right? Because the message that Iran puts out in the world related to the West and America in particular is that we are supposedly have all these social evils, right? And yet, as you mentioned, you didn't experience human rights until you came here. And while there are certainly minorities here in the US who are disadvantaged in various ways by systemic factors and by individuals, we really have no, to your point, we have no conception of what that kind of bias, that kind of prejudice, that kind of persecution is really like.
You're absolutely right. And, I remember a few years ago, there was the disputed election between Al Gore and George Bush.
I
And I
remember it
remember
well. Like
that,
Wayne said.
and I remember that somebody compared that to elections in Iran. And I think it was on NPR or CNN or maybe Fox News. I don't know. Somebody compared that. And I'm like, that is very naive. That tells me that you have really no understanding of what it's like under those systems. In this country, there are lots of problems. There's no question. There's racism, there's materialism, there's all kinds of problems. There are all forms of corruption. So I'm not trying to say that there are no problems in this country.
There's
But at
an
the end,
anti-religious bias generally.
absolutely. But at the end of the day, the Supreme Court voted and people respect it.
Yeah.
Think about that. The Supreme Court. Now you can say, well, Republicans chose that Supreme Court or the Democrats did. It doesn't matter. The people accepted the rule of law. And that is something that is not easy to find. That is not normal in the world. That is actually a bit abnormal in the world to have that kind of a system that at the end of the day, rule of law will win. So I think that it's a bit naive when people think that, for example, so-and-so within the government in Iran is a moderate. Define that for me. Moderate means that maybe they'll give you a hug before they hang you, but it doesn't mean they're not going to hang you. They will still hang you if they don't like you, if you are a minority that they don't like, if you're a political foe that they don't like, so on and so forth. They will shoot you if they don't like the fact that your hijab is not to their liking. So we need to be very careful when we use the vocabulary that we use here in this country to define the systems that are fundamentally corrupt.
Absolutely. And I want to clarify something I just said, because we actually can imagine it in America. Because if we look back into our own history, we go back 100, 200 years, we did have the same kinds of problems. The source of it was different. It was not based on religious fanaticism. However, the behavior was just as ugly. However, we changed as a nation, and we continue to change. We continue to move forward. So I say that for two reasons. One, to emphasize the positive change here in America from a very dark period of our past. And that also gives hope for the future of Iran. And Iran, I think the Baha'i writings talk about this. You would probably know them better than I, about a glorious future for Iran.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing that I'm assuming that Baha'is are aware of this, but you have a country, Iran, that is as far away from as the US physically, as you can imagine. Now go back to over 100 years ago, that it was very hard to even imagine what the US looks like if you're in Iran. So there's this religion that, just like almost all other religions, came from that part of the world. And this religion says that this country, the United States, has a spiritual destiny. So to me, there is this thing that most of us don't appreciate. There is something special about the birthplace of a faith that is supposed to represent the renewal of religion, and frankly, at some level, to this country, that is supposed to represent, potentially a better way to govern. Now, we're not there yet, but hopefully we are experimenting, and as we go through our tests and struggles, we'll ultimately get there. We're not there today, but we're not done. There's a lot more tests and struggles that we'll go through until we get there. But that spiritual destiny that this country has is something that, the Baha'i faith talks about. One of my very good friends the other day sent me a picture, took a picture of a page from my book that I shared, the prayer for America from Abdul Baha. And Abdul Baha is the son of the Prophet, founder of the Baha'i faith. And he said that brought tears to his eyes, that there is a religion, a major world religion, that's a prayer for America. And, there is no question that, and I talk about this quite a bit, that I believe that this country brings hope to the world. I've said this many times. If you're a teenager, you're living on the other side of the planet, it is not Russia, Saudi Arabia, China, any of those countries that give you hope that if you're struggling, that they may help you out, they may help out your population. But you think that there's a chance that America may help you. Why is that? Because of the history of this country, that people believe ultimately this country looks like us. They're made up of us too. This country can help us like no other country can. That is a spiritual privilege that we Americans have and this country has, that I hope that we as Americans don't want to see that hope die.
Thank you so much. I'd like to share two items that I've learned in my walk as a Baha'i, and my audience knows, I think 2007 is when I became a Baha'i. So I'm a relatively new Baha'i compared to many, but increasingly I'm learning. There are a couple of things that really stuck out to me. One is a quote from Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, that says, "The signs of my revelation have appeared in the East, and the signs of my dominion have appeared in the West." I've pondered a lot on what that means. And then America is referred to as the Great Republic of the West. And of course, here in America, we have representatives from all the peoples on earth in a unique way, at an order of magnitude that doesn't exist anywhere else on the planet. Many, if not, of course, most came here voluntarily. Others were conquered, and others were brought here as slaves. But they're all here, and they all became Americans in the melting pot, one people that worked together to then send a man to the moon, for example. Which I believe has a lot of significance I won't go into here. But the one last comment I wanted to make was that Baha'u'llah, as the founder of religion, declared that slavery was completely outlawed by religion. And past messengers, past prophets, or manifestations as the Baha'is call them, did not. Jesus regulated slavery. He said, "Are you a slave? Do not seek to be free. If you're free, don't become a slave." Muhammad also, even the Bab, the precursor to the Baha'i faith, he had servants and he died owning those servants. Baha'u'llah inherited servants, he freed them, and he declared his mission in 1863, the very year that America went to war to abolish slavery in this country. I find significance there in that quote where it says, "The signs of my dominion have appeared in the West," because Jesus did regulate slavery. He gave instructions for how one was to behave as a servant and how one was to behave as a master. Now, the kind of slavery that we had in America was not what he specifically envisioned when he did that, but he did not outlaw or abolish slavery. Baha'u'llah did. This was a Christian nation. And in 1863, when Baha'u'llah declared who he was, that is when the war was fought and blood was spilled to end slavery in this country. I find that fascinating. Take from it what you will. Everyone might interpret that very differently, but I find that fascinating.
I mean, the only thing I would like to add to that is, I think it's important for your audience to also appreciate the fact that the Baha'i faith has this concept of that religion is part of a progressive revelation. That what Jesus taught, which we of course, for us, Baha'u'llah is the prophet of our religion, but to us, Jesus is also has an equally important station as the prophet and founder of Christianity. And but what Jesus brought was the right message for that day and age. I did not live in that day and age, so I have a very hard time, fathoming what that place looked like that Jesus was, brought the teachings that he did. But clearly, that was a message. Not, for 2,000 years ago, that was revolutionary, and that is why 2,000 years later, we know that the world is a better place today because Jesus sacrificed himself 2,000 years ago, or Moses did prior to Jesus. So I think it's important for the viewers to realize that in no shape or form, as Baha'is, we view that the teachings of the Baha'i faith are more advanced. They just happen to be right for this day and age. There will be another prophet 1,000 years from now that the teachings of that prophet will be right for that day and age, and the teachings of the Baha'i faith will be outdated at that point. And I think we're the only religion out there that believes that our religion is not forever, that we believe that our religion will also expire. That, my daughter talks about religion being like the iPhone, and the message inside of it is that iOS that you have to keep updating, and that's what it's like. That it requires updating. Otherwise, we are saying that the world will remain constant, the social issues will remain constant, and so on. Well, they won't. They just won't. That's just the reality of it.
And you certainly have to start charging the battery more frequently too.
That is true also.
So this is a good convenient point to go to a commercial break. In this case, it's a little ad for your book to wrap up this section. When we come back, we're going to get into the meat of today's episode, which is diving into your role as an entrepreneur, establishing a very successful company, and the lessons you learned from that you're putting into practice with your new company. So don't go anywhere. This conversation is going to get even more interesting right after this commercial break.
1987, a young man embarked on a journey that would forever change his life. At just 16, Payam Zamani fled persecution in Iran, escaping through the perilous emptiness desert. 5 days of relentless heat, dry winds, and an unwavering will to survive. Against all odds, Payam made it to America. 12 years later, he and his brother had achieved what seemed impossible, a billion-dollar IPO on Wall Street. But success on paper couldn't shield him from the harsh lessons of modern capitalism. In 2015, Payam set out to redefine what it means to be an entrepreneur, founding One Planet Group, a company built on the principles of spiritual capitalism. One Planet Group proves that business can thrive while taking care of people, communities, and the planet. In Crossing the Desert, Payam shares his intimate journey, offering profound insights into the paths we choose and the values we hold dear. Discover how embracing life's most difficult journeys can lead to a brighter future, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. Join Payam Zamani in Crossing the Desert, and let his story inspire your own journey of resilience and transformation. Get your copy today and start your own journey towards a brighter future.
There's a QR code if somebody wants to point a device at that and go right there and order it right now. So welcome back. We're here with author Payam Zamani, and I referred earlier to his publishing a book as a little bit like giving birth. But I think that $1 billion IPO probably exceeded the stress and the effort to publishing a book. Tell us about that experience of preparing the company to go public, going public, getting it listed, watching the stock price and all that. And then we'll get into a couple of other comments that were made in the video.
Back in the 90s, early 90s in particular, those of us who were in Silicon Valley and we were interested to start companies, we often did not start businesses thinking that we can make a ton of money from building those businesses. We did that out of the passion we had for something. And it wasn't even clear that the internet would ever become something that could become commercial. Again, you got to go back to the moment in 1994 when we started AutoWeb that there were a total of 5,000 domains registered. So Ford.com was available, Honda was available. You could get autos.com, auto.com, name the domain, they were all available. We got autoweb.com because we thought autos on the web, it's got to be AutoWeb. And so we built that company against all odds. And we didn't know anything about business in the US, but there are a few things that allowed us to build that business to what it became. One is that it turned out to be the right business for the right time. And we didn't know that. There was no crystal ball to tell us that in advance. The second thing was that we made some amazing people. Again, I talk about this quite often, that a lot of places in the world, they want to build a next Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley is becoming more of a concept than a place. But the issue is that it's very difficult to build a next Silicon Valley outside of the US and outside of the Bay Area. There are a bunch of reasons. One is the people, the ecosystem of good schools. You've got entrepreneurs who've made money and they want to support other entrepreneurs now. You've got great people that they want to join these kinds of startups. They're used to taking that kind of risks. You've got landlords that they're used to giving you space without asking you for a down payment that you don't have. They ask for shares in your company in return for cash deposit, so on and so forth. And there's so many examples I can give you. That ecosystem is very difficult to replicate in other places in the world. So against all odds, we built that business because people became our mentor. People helped us build that, and the ecosystem was there. Ecosystem was created over 200 years for it to be there, for us to be able to take advantage of and build a business that we did. But yes, it was stressful because once the business gets to a point that you have employees and you have responsibility beyond yourself. Imagine if you're a parent, the moment that you have your first child, your life changes dramatically because now you're also responsible for someone else's well-being. Not to that extent, but it does feel almost the same when you are an entrepreneur and you start hiring people. When you have 100 employees, couple hundred employees, that you feel the responsibility to make sure that their well-being is also taken care of.
And they're participating in the risk because you've got
Absolutely.
cash flow issues, you've got future possibilities. There's a lot of blue sky still potential that's
Yes.
not yet fully realized. Little things can go wrong and derail the whole thing, and suddenly 100 people are out of work.
No, you're absolutely right. And then ultimately, here's a company that against all odds makes it to that point. It goes public. And then the stress of taking that business public. And that's something that, I was 28 years old when our company went public. I I really was getting on-the-job training with that business. And the stress of ensuring that now that you have shareholders, that they are going to be treated well through this company. There is real money involved and people's potentially savings and so on. So yeah, the stress level gets very high. Some of you may have heard of the illness shingles. It's known as the CEO disease because people who have a lot of stress are more likely to get shingles. And the stress level can be very high. And I tell this to people all the time. Sometimes it sounds, I guess, something that people feel like they wish they had done. They wish they were there, that if they were the CEO, if they were the entrepreneur who ran the company, built the company. I don't know. I don't necessarily think that that's something that, is for everyone, because it definitely affects your life expectancy. There's no ifs and buts about it. The amount of stress that you're under is something that you really got to sign up for, because at the end of the day, it is something that money cannot buy. No amount of money can be enough for it, assuming you're successful at it.
Yep. So in the video, the video narrative, which I think you had a hand in shaping, states, let me get the quote here right. It states that success on paper couldn't shield him from the harsh lessons of modern capitalism. Now, that's a soundbite that's intended to be a little bit dramatic, but there's something real underneath that statement. So share with us what that was. Success on paper versus the harsh lessons of modern capitalism. Unpack that a little bit for us.
Sure. I mean, if you think about capitalism as we practice it today, it really goes back to the 1980s, not even the 70s. So it's this relatively new. It's the Milton Friedman version of capitalism. It is the era of Gordon Gekko, the Wall Street movie. It is the concept that greed is good. That we are all about maximization of shareholder value, which is greed is good. So that is, I think, what I experienced for the first time. I thought as an entrepreneur, I was building the best company I could. I wanted to take care of my employees. I wanted to build a business that could really help, in that case, car buyers, the second largest transaction any individual is involved in for the most part in their lifetime. I wanted to really contribute in a meaningful way to that, to make that a more enjoyable experience. And then
so your focus was on the people, the customers, and the employees, and how this idea, this better widget, this better mousetrap would benefit them all.
Yeah, I mean, our feeling was that if we do that piece right, if we take care of the consumer, the industry will show up, because if the consumers are there, the industry, of course, would want to be there. And but we take the company public. Well, we raised money from VCs. We took a company public, and then we realized that the values were far from being aligned. There is no question that there are many VCs out there that they want to build great companies, and there are many of them. But I would say that for the most part, the financial industry, as we know it, Wall Street, mutual funds, hedge funds, and so on, they are in the business of simply buying low, selling high. That's really it at the end of the day. What happens in between? They make money from companies going down. That's called shorting a stock. So they can make money from the demise of a business, and they're perfectly fine with that. So it is all about making money. That humans are viewed as, I guess, irrelevant in that equation. It's all about that material gain. And that is what really affected me in, I guess, a negative way, that I feel like I would just want to build a great business. And then I realized all the games that go on in the name of maximization of shareholder value.
Yep. Now, I had a very similar experience between 2000 and 2004. I worked for Deloitte Consulting, part of the Deloitte and Touche accounting firm, and doing large-scale technology implementations, strategy for some of the largest companies. And I had that same experience from the other side. And it's not, I'm not going to even call it greed per se. It's just a focus on shareholder value. As you said, it boils everything down to a material result that is divorced from the impact on people. It's not so much that it's evil, it's just it's partial, it's flawed, it's not holistic, it's narrow-minded. It's like planting monocrop, right, and ending up with the Dust Bowl of the 1930s in the United States. They were just trying to produce more food more efficiently, but the results of it were very negative.
Yeah. No, you're
I don't, and
absolutely
you
right.
want to judge the heart and intent of the people. They have a job, they have a role, they're in the finance industry. That's their fiduciary responsibility. The system is structured such that if they do not focus on the bottom line, that's malpractice in medical terms. Your job is to focus on the bottom line and produce a profit and not let the company go bankrupt and maximize the profit. It's not greedy per se. It's doing your flawed, it's performing your flawed role very well, if you will.
So, I mean, that's interesting view, and I would say that the problem that I see, I just announced this, at One Planet, we took a controlling position in a publicly traded entity that revenue-wise is large, but market cap-wise is small because of the challenge that the company has had. And I agreed to play the role of CEO and chairman for a period of time to navigate the waters. And what I will tell you is that every publicly traded company in this country today, see, I said every, so I'm not, there may be some small exceptions, but I'm going to get very close to every. They have a level of ethical dilemma when it comes to the way that they run the business. Is
Absolutely.
it corruption? It's within the law,
right?
But is it corruption? I think it is something that we should consider. We should try to do better. We should not be so convinced that the ways of the past have worked. And this is something
the system itself is corrupted, and I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. It's flawed, it's imperfect, and at scale, those imperfections become very evident.
Well, that's exactly it. And so when you think about this system, divorced from spirituality, from the values that, as we raise our kids, we told them that they're important. But then when they got to this point, we said, okay, don't worry about them, maximize shareholder value. Well, the problem is that they will try to work within the guardrails that represent the law. So they meet the fiduciary responsibility, but the guardrail allows you to be unethical, allows you to be corrupt. And now you define what corrupt means, but allows you to be, but it's not illegal. So from the law, as far as that is concerned, you're perfectly fine, but you are doing things that if you really clearly believed, as a religious person saying this, there was a life after death, that I have a soul, you have a soul, we both have an existence way beyond this material existence. So no amount of money is enough for me to mistreat you for sake of marginally more gain. I will be treating you fundamentally different.
Absolutely. So let me share a perspective here. In my religious path, and I'm a former minister, in our religious belief, we kept the Old Testament laws of Moses. We kept the seventh-day Sabbath. We kept the Jewish holy days. We focused on the law. We were Christians, but we went back in time, if you will, to strip off the corruption in Christianity by going back to what did Moses teach, right? Today you might see a sign, what would Jesus do? Well, we asked, well, what did Moses actually teach? So we had an interesting perspective. But when you look at what Jesus did, Jesus treated the sinners with great respect, but he ripped the religious leaders a new one, right? He tore into them. He created a whip. He went into the temple and he drove out the money changers, and he contested with the religious leaders. He called them vipers, snakes, hypocrites, whitewashed sepulchres. He had very strong, harsh words for the religious leaders. Why? Because they focused on the law, and they actually used the law to their benefit. And Jesus showed them how they had misinterpreted the law, and he taught them the spiritual intent of the law. Right? He said, and he fulfilled a verse in the Old Testament in which it says he will magnify the law and make it honorable. Right? So that's where we're at in society today. To your point, these
Yeah.
people are following the law. They have a legal fiduciary responsibility. We have this elaborate global system of commerce because, as you pointed out earlier, we respect the law, and those laws are written to protect people in many ways. But Warren Buffett had this great quote years ago where he said, trickle-down economics works, but the rich have found a way to plug the leaks, right? Because laws can be bended and twisted to serve the
Yeah.
rich and powerful to the disadvantage of the poor.
That's
So,
right.
so how do you? But you can't be vague and fuzzy, right? The personal admonition to turn the other cheek, love your enemy, and forgive. The state has a responsibility to correct and even punish. The individual has the responsibility to forgive, but the state has to deal with the rapist to make sure that the rapist, who hopefully will be forgiven, which is a horrible thing, will not commit that crime again, will not be able to commit that crime again. You follow me? So
Yeah.
the individual responsibility, the state responsibility, it's difficult to create laws that enforce a spiritual intent. And is that not, in a nutshell, the challenge that you face with One Planet Group?
Absolutely. And, I want to just back up a little bit and say one thing, and that is, I think that we need to also accept that greed is not limited to corporations. I think that's really important to accept, that corporations represent us. They're run by you and I, by our neighbors. So it is not us, them versus us or anything of that sort. When you think about the financial crisis of 15 years ago, when all those bad mortgage deals were put in place, well, who got those sweetheart deals that the banks could not service and they went bankrupt? Well, you and I did, right? You and I wanted homes that we could not afford, that we should have never, ever owned. But we wanted a 4-bedroom house that was 3,500 square feet when we should have been buying a 1,200 square feet with 2 bedrooms. But we have greed at every level of society. I was talking to somebody that I know, and, he works at one of the major corporations. And he was telling me that how he's been rebuilding campers and souping them up and so on. I said, when do you have time? He said, remote work. And, so let's not forget, it's not just the employers and the corporations that are greedy. The employees are too. It goes both ways. It's everywhere. And the only way we're going to deal with this is going to be a spiritual transformation. There is no other way about it. There is no other way. No amount of law will ever stop me from being racist. None. If I'm racist in heart, I will remain a racist. And if I'm going to find unethical ways to run my business, I will always find those unethical ways. So the way that I'm trying to spread the message and hope that more people will accept and will join is that don't do it for them. Don't do it for others. Do it for yourself. Because at the end of the day, you and I are by far happier, by far more joyful when we feel that there's an element of service and betterment of the world and betterment of society associated with what we do. We have a lighter load when we have that sense. We enjoy our lives a lot more. I fundamentally believe the idea of building a business, working so hard, so at one point in your life, you can write big checks to charity, or maybe you can become a philanthropist. I think that's a flawed model. We need to be philanthropists from the day we are an adult, that we have a dime in our pocket, we can give away a penny, because that will bring joy to us. Let that journey be as fun, as amazing, as joyful as it can be. I come across executive CEOs all the time that they work themselves to death and they do financially well. At the end of the day, they're not happy. They're not joyful because it's all after more money. And more money, we know it. Every study has shown is not going to make us any more joyful or happier. Whether you have, we see people have 100 billion, that's no longer enough. I don't know I don't know what is ever enough, but if I feel like my joy comes from that accumulation of capital, my ability to accumulate more resources to consume more on this planet. Consuming more is not just, buying more cans of water. Consuming more could be that I want to buy more land. I want to buy more skyscrapers. I want to buy more companies. It's consumption at the end of the day. If I think I'm going to gain joy, I'm going to be happier by maximizing my ability to consume more, well, I'm going to find out the hard way that will not be the case.
Yeah, when I was a minister in Germany for 10 years, in the local church, one of the three that I was associate pastor in, there was a deacon who was a financial advisor. And he had this picture up in his wall drawn by a cartoonist within our denomination that was published in one of our magazines. But it was this great picture of like a boy on a skateboard looking up at a boy with a bike, and the boy with the bike was looking up at a guy on a motorcycle, and the guy in the motorcycle was looking up at a guy in a car who was looking up at a guy in a Porsche, and then looking up at a guy in a plane, right? And they're all looking up at the next one enviously, right?
Yeah, of course.
And he had that on his wall next to his degree as a financial advisor to do exactly this, to say, well, wait a minute, there's a reason and a purpose for wealth. Remember what it's for, and it's not for selfish, personal, gain. Enjoy it, but share it, and don't, focus on it excessively.
I agree. And also understanding that at the end of the day, accumulated wealth is the worst form of wealth. That wealth is meant to be spent on yourself, on humanity, and so on. You want to be like in your life, like a fountain that keeps giving itself away, rather than just keeping hoarding and holding on to more and more. So generational wealth, or the concept of I want to save all my money and then put in a foundation, so 1% a year goes away, so the foundation remains in place. Let the world become a better place today.
Thank you. We're going to go to a commercial break, and coincidentally, sort of, we've got a conversation going on in the chat here about employee stock ownership and whatnot. And I'm just going to share one quote here. We'll get into more audience quotes later. But this happens to be an author whose book we're going to show an ad for, Eric Monshine. He's talking about employee ownership. One result is that employees not only benefit from the success of their business, but their efforts can increase that success, which is that whole flow. And you were talking about people working remotely who are spending more time converting trailers into houses than they are working for their employer. Anyway, Eric Monshine's book harkens back to a simpler time, a time in America where people had aspirations, but they were kept in balance. We'll be right back after this commercial break with more from Payam Zamani. Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson. I'm here with Payam Zamani. And that was Eric Monshine's Life at 12 College Road. There's the QR code if anybody wants to pick up that wonderful story, 33 vignettes of a simpler time in America's history. So Payam, I was looking up your name before the show. We talked about this briefly. It comes from a Persian word that means message. Is that right?
That's right.
So what are, as we're nearing now the part of the show where we'll dive into the audience comments, what are some of the messages that you want to make sure the audience really understands about your journey, your understanding, and this topic that we had, which is faith-driven leadership in times of change?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned something at the end of the last segment I just want to touch on real quick, if that's okay, about ownership and profit share. It's interesting because, clearly ownership sharing is something that the world I come from, the world of Silicon Valley and so on, they're very much used to. There has been an unintended consequence associated with that. And that is, they typically have, when you receive so many stock options, they have 4-year vesting associated with them. People vest half of those shares, and then they move on to the next company, and then the next company, and the next company, so they can accumulate a portfolio of shares from many different companies. So few people are in the business of company building. They're typically in the business of, again, just serving their own financial portfolio building. So I don't know what the solution is to that. I'm a big fan of profit share rather than a system like that. So one thing that we have done, for example, in my companies is that we have shared ownership with a select group of people within the organization, but that ownership only belongs to you if you are with the company. If you leave the company, that stays behind for the next person who will take that role. But if the company is sold when you are with the company, that is yours. You get the equivalent of that percentage that belonged to you. The idea is to have a group of people that they want to be company builders. They want to build community builders in a sense. And that has worked well for us. I mean, if you look at the average tenure of employees at Facebook and so on, is only about 2 years. And in our company, it's closer to 7-8 years. So I'm not sure if that's part of the reason, but definitely we've been happy with that. What do I want the takeaway to be? I think that life is full of struggles, and these struggles could be mental, could be material, could be in all, they could be in relationships. And, and I've had them all, the message, the biggest message that I want to have for people is that be optimistic. There is hope, and the bad days are always followed by good days, and good days are almost always followed by bad days. And I share this message in the context of building your life, whether it's your business life or it is building your career, like as I did in my early days, or if you're an immigrant and you're dealing with really challenging issues of making ends meet. I've tried to share it in all of those situations as I have struggled throughout my life. I think that the second, if you look at my book, the second half really resonates with entrepreneurs and professionals. And the first half resonates with younger individuals who want to know how they can also succeed, and immigrants. I think they can definitely, a lot of people read the book and they say, this is my story. And I tell them, yeah, I know. And I know that a lot of us have the same story. The setting changes, but the story is very much the same.
Thank you so much. I'm reflecting a little bit on, first of all, thank you for making what's relatively complex and maybe hard to grasp and a little bit over the heads of people about how the capital markets work. But I love that you're making it understandable by relating it to the people involved and the personal sort of human element to that. But as I'm thinking about it systemically, you're kind of saying that the capital markets themselves and the way they create vast accumulations of wealth for individuals, there's something that maybe needs to be looked at there. And that led me to think about the whole income tax situation versus wealth tax, right? And again, I spent a lot of time studying the Bible, the Old Testament, and Moses laid out an economic structure in which this is where the idea of a tithe comes from, a tenth of your income. But it was on the increase, right? It was more of a wealth tax than an income tax. And I know in the Baha'i faith, you've got hukukullah, which is the right of God, which is also more of a wealth tax, right? It's something that you're not paying on the income that's flowing through. You're giving to God an amount based on what you've accumulated. So for example, at the end of your life, you can choose to wait until later in life and then sort of settle up this obligation based on your awareness or understanding of what you've accumulated, what your wealth is at that time. So it's not an income tax idea, and it's not a tax anyway, but you get my point. It's not on the income you make ongoing, which tends to hurt those who have less, right? Because they have to pay a portion of their income when they can barely afford to live. And the wealthy can sit on their wealth and it's not income, so it's not taxable in the same way, right? But it's interesting to think about, and when we talk about the system being corrupted by a flawed principle that seemed to work well, but at scale falls apart. At scale, it creates vast inequities.
Yeah, no, I mean, you bring up. I mean, this is a big subject, and I definitely have my feelings about it. I think that, I mean, my wife and I, we talk about this quite often, that when we try to maximize something, whether it's whatever investment we've made and so on, we say that, well, we got to remain detached, because at the end of the day, we're not going to take it with us. We're not going to leave it all to our kids. We're going to give majority of it for charitable causes, more than likely the Baha'i Fund. So the point here is that at the end of the day, depending on how we look at wealth, our view changes on things. And I think that taxation has to be fair. Baha'u'llah talks about this in one of his letters to the rulers of the world, that, be careful how much you tax your people. And I think we've seen that a lot of countries, governments, they tax their people to the breaking point. And I think that there needs to be, when I talk about spiritual transformation, unless you have that spiritual transformation, unfortunately, the wealthy always have more choices about shielding their income and their money from taxes. There are many ways they can do that. It's the
They can
average Joe
afford
that
to
at the
hire
end,
people to work within the system and structure so that they can do that.
It's the average Joe that's stuck with the biggest tax bill as a percentage of their income. So I think we need to be careful how we tax our population, because again, the rich will end up paying a lot. I mean, a great example is California. California has the highest tax bracket for people than any other state in the country. Well, they've had the highest migration of wealthy people from the state. Is it benefiting the poor of the state? No, because you want the tax from the rich people, but the rich people had the choice to move to their vacation homes in Florida and live there, while the poor did not have that choice. So we need to be careful how so that's why it goes back to that spiritual transformation, that the wealthy feel that because of the love they have for humanity, who cares about 15%? I want to give it all away. It is, I don't want any of it. There's a hidden word from Baha'u'llah that says, "O ye rich ones on earth, the poor in your midst are my trust. Guard ye my trust, and be not intent only on your own ease." This will cause me to want to give away everything. But when I feel that there is unjust taxation that is not designed properly, and there's a lot of waste on the other end of it, there is no question that makes you feel like, I wish the system was different. But at the end of the day, we're law-abiding citizens, as we all should be, but it doesn't mean that we cannot continue to hope and work towards a better future.
Well, and reflect on reality, right? One of the
Yeah,
great things about this republic is we do have 50 different states that have some autonomy. So they have the
that's right.
freedom to play around with different structures to see what actually works, right? And the
That's right.
problem comes when somebody in what I'll use this term specifically, you know where it comes from, in their vain imagination and idle fancy, they have some kind of ism that they've bought into, some kind of idea, some kind of philosophy that they're now trying to enforce in a coercive way to force everybody to go along with their vision of utopia. But in the United States, we have 50 different states where things can be, experimented with differently, and people
That's right.
can vote with their feet and move from California to somewhere else. I mean, I moved from California here to Wisconsin. I was in
That's right.
Germany for 10 years, Germany being a socialist country. As a kid, I was in Sweden. And for me, that was utopia. But of course, I was a child and I didn't really fully understand. But I was a fan of socialism,
Mm,
European style socialism, Scandinavian style socialism. But then as an adult, I worked in the German economy for 10 years. And I loved it at first. But after 6, 7 years, I began to see the flaws and the errors in that. And the coercive compression of choices and freedom that made it difficult for you to be in any way upwardly mobile, to in any way take control of your own life and circumstances, and improve your situation by working harder, for example. So I came back to America, converted away from that kind of socialism,
mhm.
right? So
Sure.
reflecting on reality and really thinking about it deeply and researching into it, um, is very important, and not just following some ideology.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm talking about states. It's funny. I was comparing California to Tennessee recently. California has the highest rate of taxation. I think it's about 15%, and Tennessee has zero. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe their highways are not as good, but they're good. Like maybe homelessness is very high in Tennessee. It's lower than California. Like, okay, maybe their property taxes are out of control. They're lower than California. I'm like, okay, well, there's got to be something, but there isn't. They tax their fuel less. So how is it they're able to operate? I don't know. I'm not really, in Asia performer. I've not studied this, but to me, it just seems like, you've got just like any company, you've got organizations that are more efficiently run than others. They have less structural expenses that are designed, but there is no question that whether you're running a country or a state or a company, there are ways that you can become more efficient. And at the end of the day, if you're able to become more efficient and you pass that efficiency to your community, you give them the freedom to basically live the life that they aspire to. And maybe their life is that they want to have more finances available to them so they can do more charitable work. And you give them that choice. You give them that opportunity to do that kind of work. So
Well, wonderful. We're going to now say thank you so much. This has been just truly amazing. I have so much appreciated being able to have this conversation with you. It's not every day one gets to sit down with a successful entrepreneur, having taken a company public to the tune of $1 billion, starting multiple companies, acting as CEO. This has indeed been an honor. And I'm
thank
so
you.
glad that I've had the opportunity to have this discussion and share it with our audience. Let's look at a couple of the comments that they've had to share about. You can see them on the right of your screen, probably. And anyway, I'll be picking some out and sharing them. But if you see any that you'd particularly like to talk about,
I put on my
we'll.
glasses.
Here's one from earlier on, from Peace on Earth. It's interesting how everybody tries to move to the U.S. instead of dealing with problems in their own countries, running away from problems. It's a bit immature. Now, obviously, I'm assuming Peace on Earth is not referring to you as a 16-year-old who escaped Iran, but rather, I mean, but in fairness, I guess there's a tiny bit of truth to that even. But yes, people come to America because America is so much better, and sometimes the problems in their country are beyond their control. But what's your take on this?
Well, I will say the same thing, that then if you live in California, whether you like California or not, live and die in California, don't move to another place, another state that you may think that life could be better there. I think that we live in a day and age that we should not limit ourselves to lines drawn maybe hundreds of years ago, that I was born here, I got to die here. If there is better opportunity elsewhere, I should go there. And if this individual, if they find better opportunities in France, they should be able to go there. Why not? So at the end of the day, I believe that there is something special with people wanting to come to this country. It makes this country a better country, particularly as the population of the world will go down, which we are seeing is going down in many countries. A country that's able to attract people and they want to move there will be in a very envious position.
Thank you. Here's another one. 80s limo. When I was talking about slavery 100 years ago, this comment came in, now we're all slaves to the government. What's your take on the discussion around big government versus, let's say, libertarian views where, people should have complete autonomy and freedom? How do you view that question?
I mean, clearly there needs to be a balance. Complete autonomy, complete freedom at some point is not, I think, what is desired for humans. There needs to be guardrails, the same way you don't want to see all the red lights and the stop signs removed from the streets, otherwise there'll be chaos. We need to have some guardrails in the broader life of the community, and the community being defined as a country. So the question is, how much is enough? And in general, I think that there needs to be probably more left to families to decide, to individuals, and the government, from my perspective, my personal perspective, should be minimized to what is necessary. It's interesting. An Irish person recently told me that he said, I like something about America. I'm like, what is it? He said that you can do everything and anything you want until the government says you cannot do it. But then you take the government to court, say that, no, I want to continue to do that thing. And sometimes you win. And I'm like, well, that's kind of an interesting way to put it. So anyhow, I think there's a balance here that needs to be had.
Thank you. So here's one when we were talking about the stress of entrepreneurship. I've always wondered how many years are knocked off of a business owner due to the stress. So how do you manage that work-life balance?
It's interesting. My work-life balance is usually very well managed. Recently, it's been very well managed. Until about a month ago, it all changed. And I think I will go through about 6 months of not having the balance, and then I'm committed to going back to the situation I was in. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if any studies have been done. I haven't read, but I gotta believe that the stress that you have about an organization, it is something that affects us, affects our well-being, affects maybe many different aspects of our lives, including our family lives. So again, I tell people, be careful what you ask for. Sometimes it's okay to have a paycheck, offer an honest day's worth of work, and not have the stress that some other people have in the evenings, on the weekends. It never stops.
In that same context, I just had to share this one. This is a great comment from Tejas. Amen. There aren't any U-Hauls following a hearse.
Talking about U-Haul, I had to drive a U-Haul this past weekend to take my daughters to school.
Yeah. So you're at that phase. So
yeah.
How is that feeling of empty nest for you?
Oh, we became empty nesters, last year, and it's another stage in life. It was particularly difficult for me. I think I love having our daughters, in our home all the time, but also there's a lot of joy in seeing them growing up and becoming adults.
Here's a Bible quote: "The love of money is the root of all evil." I love this quote. It's actually a misquote. It's the love of money is a root, not the root. It's one of the roots of evil. But yes, absolutely. Just that materialism, right? And especially there's something about money, right? It's like cocaine. It's not so much, even to your point earlier about spending the money, right? To to enjoy it with yourself and with others, right? To spend that money in service and joy and even some fun, and service can be fun, but it's the accumulation and the desire to see maybe a bank account and putting your trust in that, right? Is that?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that, if you are making money and you're doing it in an honest way, and you are trying to create a balance in your life, that you're not necessarily trying to maximize it, meaning that, I mean, like, you see companies that try to maximize it by paying low, not offering benefits, and so on. If you're doing it right and you happen to make money because the value of the company went up, the company was sold, and you were able to come to capital. I think the key is to not fall in love with that capital and be willing to part ways with it, and understand at the end of the day, you only need so much, and you can contribute to the betterment of the world, and gain that joy. I shared this once with someone. I said that, why not, whatever you have, and you don't have to have a whole lot, but whatever you have that you can part ways with, why not wait till you're dead, and then as part of your will, do that? His point was, why don't you want to experience that joy while you're alive? And I'm like, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
There's a lot of joy in that.
Here was Peace on Earth back and agreeing with you in a sense. I'm convinced nothing is going to change until people's consciousness is elevated to a new level.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's why I believe in spiritual, transformation of all of us and our structures, our systems. The systems that we have, for the most part, are very material in nature these days. And as we have walked away more and more from religion as a people, I think they become even so much more material in nature. And so, yeah, I mean, that level of consciousness is going to be needed.
And here was a specific question from owner and consumer. How long has Payam been a business owner? So how old were you when you started that first company?
So,
and what were the circumstances? Were you employed somewhere else and you did it on the side, or did you just, rush off full risk? What was that? What was the first few months of that decision to start that company like?
So, if you get a chance to read my book, you'll see that, I, even at a very young age, at age 11, 12, I did entrepreneurial things. I loved always having a side hustle. And but the first real company I started in 1994 with my brother, we just one day decided we're gonna build a company, and we decided that we're gonna put in place a corporation and so on and build it. And so that was 1994. So I have owned and operated businesses since 1994. Can't believe 30 years.
Wonderful. So there were quite a few more comments, but we're a little bit over time. Thank you so much. A whole lot of conversation there in the chat. Payam, you might want to take a moment to look through some of them, and if there's anything you want to talk about, we can bring that up. I'm going to go to one more quick commercial break before we wrap up tonight. And this particular commercial break is a commercial for this show, i.e. this show next week. I want to tell you who we're going to have on next week. We have an amazing guest. I'm not going to spill the beans. I'm going to share the video and mention a couple things about him at the end. Stay tuned. We'll be right back to wrap up with Payam Zamani.
For centuries, physicists have sought to explain the universe, from the grand dance of galaxies to the invisible world of subatomic particles. But what happens when the act of observation itself changes what we see? When consciousness, the very thing that makes us observers, becomes part of the equation. Physicists have found that the lines between the observer and the observed are blurred, making consciousness a puzzle they cannot ignore. To unlock the mysteries of the cosmos, they must understand the workings of the mind. This book explores the deep interconnections between quantum mechanics, cosmology, and human consciousness. Can the structure of the brain reveal the secrets of the universe? Can the laws of physics help us understand the nature of our own awareness? Join George Musser on a journey to the cutting edge of science, where the quest for a theory of everything meets the profound mysteries of the human mind. Could understanding the universe start with understanding ourselves? Putting Ourselves Back in the Equation by George Musser. Available now.
So that's next week's episode with George Musser. In case you don't know who George Musser is, he was the cosmology editor for Scientific American from 2004, I believe, till about 2014, for about 10 years. He continues to be a contributing editor. And this is the April issue of Scientific American. The cover, I've been a subscriber since about 2004. The cover article, What We're Learning from AI, was written by George Musser. So this is an amazing opportunity to dive deep into that topic of quantum physics, consciousness, from a gentleman who has been spending the last 20 plus years focused on this topic. You don't want to miss next week's show. So Payam, were there any comments in particular that you thought we needed to comment on, or just any concluding words that you want to share with the audience before we wrap up for tonight?
You know, I read a lot of the comments, and I love the engagement. You have a very engaged audience, and you know, speaks highly of the program you put together. So thank you for having me. And you know, the biggest message that I have for anyone that I speak to, and the reason I wrote my book, and the reason that I have the interest I have in spiritual capitalism, is the idea that we are able to live our professional life and our service life, and combine them into one. And you know, as Baha'is, we were told that work offered in the spirit of service can be same as worship. And so the question really is, how can we elevate our work so it can be same as worship? I think if we can do that, the outcome is going to be just so much better than if we are just solely focused on maximization of profits. But the interesting thing, though, is, and I tell this to all entrepreneurs that I speak to, if you follow the spiritual beliefs, the timeless spiritual values, what you will find is that your business will actually become more profitable. So it is not as though you give up on profits, not at all. Who doesn't want to work for a company like that? Who doesn't want to become a client of that kind of a company? They all want to. So you build a very strong community, and that's something I've experienced, and I frankly highly recommend it to people to follow and think about those principles that they can incorporate.
Wonderful. One more little plug. We have coming up several times in the next few months, Bruce Kerber, who was on here recently with Divine Economics, and he'll be talking about microeconomics, macroeconomics, and the same idea of spiritual principles and spiritual teachings into the economic system. So Payam, I hope you might consider joining us again. It's been such an honor to have you here. But as we unpack this topic and learn more about it, we've also had Steve Keen on the show earlier, a respected economist in his own right, out there a little bit with some other ideas. But this is an important topic, and would love to have you back on and sort of reflect on, you know, some of the workings and what we as individuals can do, and how we should elevate our own individual consciousness to have intelligent, meaningful discussions about these topics in our communities and with other people, because spreading sorry, my daughter's cat Licorice thinks this conversation is interesting, or else she wants her nighttime snack. I don't know which. Anyway, would love to have you back to continue this discussion on business and economics from a spiritual perspective, if that's something you're open to.
Absolutely. I'd love that.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a wrap. Unless you have any concluding comments, would just encourage everyone, reach out, get Payam's book. Let me put that QR code up here again at the end, so that you can learn more about his amazing journey and his insights crossing the desert. We'll have him back on the show in the near future. And we'll see you all here next week, 8 p.m. Central, for Created in the Image of God. Until then, may God be with you.